So we're going to be looking at Mark chapter 12, verses 13 to 17 in this first little section. And so I'm going to read out the verses and we'll dig into it together. But first, sanitized correctly. All right, Mark chapter 12, verses 13 to 17. We're going to encounter Jesus fending off a trap from his enemies who are trying to get him to say the wrong thing with regard to paying taxes to Caesar. So this is a hostile encounter between Jesus and his enemies. This is starting in verse 13. And they sent to him some of the Pharisees and some of the Herodians to trap him in his talk. And they came and said to him, "Teacher, we know that you are true and do not care about anyone's opinion, for you are not swayed by appearances, but truly teach the way of God. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Should we pay them or should we not?" But knowing their hypocrisy, he said to them, "Why put me to the test? Bring me a denarius and let me look at it." And they brought one. And he said to them, "Whose likeness and inscription is this?" And they said to him, "Caesar's." And Jesus said to them, "Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." And they marveled at him. Jesus faces off against two groups of religious leaders. And we've seen it all throughout the Gospel of Mark. He's facing all this hostility. Jesus is the fulfillment of all of God's Old Testament promises, that God will be with his people, that God will give them a king to rule over them, and that God will bring in a kingdom of justice and righteousness and life. And so Jesus is the fulfillment. That's how Mark tries to portray his ministry. And along the way, again, he faces all of this opposition. And he faces some familiar enemies. He faces the Pharisees, and he faces the Herodians. Now, what's interesting about the Pharisees and the Herodians are they are enemies themselves. They don't like each other. The Pharisees are sort of like revolutionaries. They want to kick out Rome. They want to start a rebellion to free Israel from Roman occupation. But the Herodians, they're sort of in tight with Rome. They get a lot of political and social perks by allying with Rome. So they're on both ends of the political spectrum. But when it comes to Jesus, they find a common enemy. And so this is what makes it really interesting. And so they go to Jesus with this question: should he and his disciples pay taxes to Caesar, to the Roman ruler? Now, if Jesus says yes, then the crowd is going to hate him for siding with the Romans. His disciples and the people around him are going to think, well, you're just capitulating to the people that are oppressing us, and you are compromising. So if he says yes, pay taxes to Caesar, he's in a hard place. But if he says no, don't pay taxes to Caesar, then he's going to be branded as a revolutionary. He's going to be breaking the law, and that's going to bring the wrath of Rome against him. So it seems like he's kind of trapped between a rock and a hard place. But Jesus understands that they're not really asking a genuine question. Just like he's done in multiple other occasions through the Gospel of Mark, he recognizes that they're hypocrites, that they don't actually care about obedience to God. All they care about is their agenda to kill him. So he flips the script on them and he says, actually, I want to ask you a question. Whose image is on a Roman coin, on a denarius? And they say Caesar's image. In fact, many Roman coins would say things like Caesar is the divine son or some kind of a demigod. He had some divine power. And so he says, well, on every coin, you have the image of Caesar and his rule. And then he says, give whatever belongs to Caesar. Whatever bears Caesar's image, give that to him. But whoever bears God's image, give that to God. So he does something really interesting here. Who bears God's image? People do. And what I think he's doing here is he's saying, look, we're not about a revolution. We're not about saying, look, let's just like kick out Rome. Let's just pick up our axes and spears and just kick people out. He's saying, actually, there's a way to submit to the authorities that God has actually put in place without giving your ultimate allegiance to them. He finds a third way. And he relativizes, doesn't revolution against, but relativizes authority. And he says, you know what, look, it's just money, it's just stuff. If it's Caesar's coins, pay your taxes, go do that. But ultimately, you belong to God. And because you belong to God, all this other stuff, this material stuff, all this stuff of this world, that doesn't mark you, that doesn't own you. And you can remember that there's an authority that even Caesar has to bow down to. That however many coins bear his image and bear his reign and bear his rulership, every human being bears the mark of God. And every human being belongs, is under the rule of God. And I think in our political times, with all the crazy stuff going on, it's important to remember who you belong to, that every Christian has dual citizenship. That we are first and foremost kingdoms of the citizen of heaven, or citizens of the kingdom of heaven. And secondly, we're citizens of the kingdom of the earth. We are to be good citizens of our nation. But we're never to let that become identified with the kingdom of God. And we're to recognize that ultimately, God is the one who rules. That there's a king above all other kings. And he is the one who deserves our lives and who deserves our ultimate allegiance.